Okay, Assalamu alaikum students. So let's get started with AS Physics, October November 2025, paper 2, variant 2. So yeah, let's see this question. Let's zoom in a bit. Okay. Scientists are investigating the variation in air pressure at different locations on a mountain. Okay. The scientists take measurements of several physical quantities at each location. Complete table 1.1 by stating the SI base units for each quantity and identifying with a tick whether each quantity is a scalar or a vector quantity. Use the space below for any working. तो बेटा एयर टेम्परेचर के एस आई बेस यूनिट्स क्या होंगे? व्हाट आर द एस आई बेस यूनिट्स ऑफ टेम्परेचर? केल्विन के. इट इज अ स्केलर क्वांटिटी. प्रेशर के एस आई बेस यूनिट्स क्या होंगे? डू यू रिमेंबर प्रेशर का क्या फॉर्मूला हुआ करता था? प्रेशर इज इक्वल टू फोर्स ओवर एरिया. व्हाट आर द यूनिट्स ऑफ फोर्स? के जी एम एस माइनस टू. व्हाट आर द यूनिट्स ऑफ एरिया? मीटर स्क्वायर. ऊपर ले जाओ. kg m minus 1 s minus 2 are your SI base units of pressure. Also, pressure is a scalar quantity. आगे बढ़ते हैं बेटा. Okay, at one location the density of air is this. अच्छा जी, density of air आ गई आपके पास 1.1. A spherical weather balloon is filled with a gas and released from the rest. The balloon has a radius of this. Okay. Density आ गई आपके पास, radius आ गया. Calculate the upthrust on the balloon when it is released. Upthrust कैसे निकालेंगे? Density of the fluid, gravitational field strength, volume of the object. Density of the fluid is 1.1, gravitational field strength is 9.81. And volume of the object कैसे निकालेंगे? This balloon is a sphere. बेटा ये जो balloon हमारे पास है, this is a sphere. What is the volume of a sphere? 4 over 3 pi r cube. 4 over 3 pi into r, that is 0.9 का cube. What does your upthrust comes out to be? Upthrust क्या आ जाएगी बेटा? 33 Newton. Simple, easy peasy, nothing complicated. Explain why an upthrust acts on a balloon. Upthrust क्यों act कर रही है on a balloon? Yes. Why does upthrust act on a balloon? So what will you say? Due to the difference in pressure between the top and bottom surfaces. Due to, या इस तरह लिख लो. Upthrust acts due to difference in pressure between the top and bottom surfaces. Perfect. The pressure on the bottom surface is greater compared to the pressure on the top surface. Hence, the bottom surface experiences a larger force. Experiences a larger force. Simple. आपने बताना है अपथ्रस्ट क्यों अकर करती है? ड्यू टू डिफरेंस इन प्रेशर बिटवीन द टॉप एंड द बॉटम सरफेस. बॉटम सरफेस पे प्रेशर ज़्यादा है, दैट्स व्हाई इट एक्सपीरियंसेस अ लार्जर फोर्स. ओके. द बलून हैज़ अ वेट ऑफ 19 न्यूटन. Calculate the magnitude of initial acceleration of the balloon. How will you do that? बेटा फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल बलून को हम बना लेते हैं. लेट्स सपोज दिस इज योर बलून. ओके. बलून पे एक डाउनवर्ड फोर्स लग रही है, दैट इज वेट ऑफ 19 न्यूटन. बलून पे एक अपवर्ड फोर्स लग रही है, दैट इज upthrust. Upthrust was equals to, let me see, 33 Newton. Okay. Upthrust was equals to 33 Newton. Can you calculate the resultant force, beta? 33 minus 19 is your resultant force. Resultant force क्या आ गई? 14 Newton. अब resultant force की जगह आप क्या लिख सकते हो? Mass into acceleration is equals to 14. How will you calculate the mass? Weight given है, yes. Weight divided by 9.81 is your mass multiplied by acceleration is equals to 14. Acceleration की value आ जाएगी? Yes. Acceleration is equals to 14 into 9.81 divided by 19. What does your value of acceleration comes out to be? बेटा acceleration की value क्या आ गई? 7.2 meters per second square. The value of acceleration comes out to be 7.2 meters per second square. Simple. A quantity c relating to the motion of the ball is calculated from three measured quantities k, f and v. The percentage uncertainties in the measured values are given in table 1.2. अच्छा जी, table 1.2 में आपको percentage uncertainties given है. The calculated value of c is this. You have to determine the absolute uncertainty in c. आपने absolute uncertainty in c निकालनी है. How will you do that? First of all, can you realize this formula? Yes. इस formula में क्या लिखा हुआ है? c is equals to 2kf divided by v square. Now, if you want to calculate the percentage uncertainty in C, that will be equal to what? Percentage uncertainty of K plus the percentage uncertainty of F plus 2 times the percentage uncertainty of V. बेटा हमने absolute uncertainty in C निकालनी है before calculating the absolute uncertainty in C. Let's calculate the percentage uncertainty in C. Percentage uncertainty in C is equals to the percentage uncertainty in K plus the percentage uncertainty in F plus 2 times the percentage uncertainty in V. What is the percentage uncertainty in K? 5. What is the percentage uncertainty in F? 3. What is the percentage uncertainty in V? 4. The percentage uncertainty in C comes out to be 16%. Simple. Nothing complicated here. कुछ भी हमने यहाँ पे complicated नहीं किया. Now, all of you might know that the percentage uncertainty in C can be written like this. Absolute uncertainty in C divided by the actual value of C multiplied by 100. क्या आपके पास C की actual value है? Yes, 1.3. 1.8, sorry. Do you have the absolute percentage uncertainty? Yes, 16. Absolute uncertainty नहीं है. C की actual value is 1.8 multiplied by 100. Can you calculate this absolute uncertainty in C? Yes, very easy. How will you do that? 16 into 1.8 divided by 100 is equals to absolute uncertainty in C. Can you calculate this absolute uncertainty in C? Yes, the absolute uncertainty in C comes out to be 0.3. यहाँ पे लिख लो 0.3. Simple. आगे बढ़ते हैं बेटा. A spacecraft in deep space uses jets of hot gases from its thruster to change its velocity. Figure 2.1 shows a side view of the spacecraft and some of its thruster. ठीक है भाई, ये आपके पास एक aircraft है and these are the thrusters A, B and C. Okay. Thruster A is at a distance of 1.6 meters, okay, leftward from the center of gravity of the spacecraft. Beta, this is the center of gravity COG. Thruster A क्या है? 1.6 meters from center of gravity, okay. That thruster C is at a distance of 0.4 meters upward from the center of gravity. अच्छा जी, ये thruster C क्या है? Upward है 0.4 meters from the center of gravity. Thruster A and B produce forces on the spacecraft in the upward direction only. अच्छा, ये आपके ऊपर upward direction में forces exert करते हैं, okay. Thruster C can produce a force in the leftward direction only. Okay. Thruster C can only produce a force in the leftward direction. Perfect. All the thrusters shown produce forces entirely in the same plane as the center of gravity. Okay. Thruster A is activated, producing a force of 60 Newton upwards. Acha ji, you have a force of 60 Newton upward. Perfect. And thruster C is also activated, producing a force of 220 Newton to the left side. Acha ji, you have a force of 220 Newton to the left side. Perfect. Calculate the resultant moment due to these forces about the center of gravity. तो बेटा सेंटर ऑफ ग्रेविटी क्या होगी? सेंटर ऑफ ग्रेविटी इज योर पिवट नाउ. यू हैव टू कैलकुलेट द रिजल्टेंट मोमेंट अगर सेंटर ऑफ ग्रेविटी आपका पिवट है. बेटा अगर सेंटर ऑफ ग्रेविटी को आपने पिवट बना दिया है, व्हाट विल बी योर रिजल्टेंट मोमेंट? हाउ विल यू कैलकुलेट दैट? बड़ा इजी है, बड़ा सिंपल है. जस्ट फोकस ऑन द बोर्ड. Just focus on the board, everything will get clear. First of all, can you realize, can you humbly realize, beta, okay, the 60 Newton की force will cause which type of moment? This 60 Newton की force about the pivot will cause a clockwise moment. Sir, how to calculate this clockwise moment? Force multiplied by the distance between the force and the pivot. Can you realize ये 60 Newton की force is acting in the y-axis? Perpendicular distance will be this. Distance in the x-axis 1.6 meters. Always remember, बेटा देखो हमेशा याद रखो, ये एक की पॉइंट है जो मैं क्लासेस में भी पढ़ाता हूँ. If your force is acting in the y-axis, vertically act कर रही है, your perpendicular distance will be horizontally. So can you calculate this clockwise moment? Yes, 60 into 1.6. Clockwise moment क्या आ जाएगा? Use a calculator. 60 into 1.6 करते हैं भाई. 60 into 1.6. This comes out to be 96 Newton meter as your clockwise moment. Now, furthermore, if you realize this 220 Newton की force will rotate you in the anti-clockwise direction. अब ये force किस axis में है? X axis में. या force is acting horizontally, the perpendicular distance will be in the y-axis or vertical. 220 into 0.4. What is the anti-clockwise moment? 220 into 0.4. Anti-clockwise moment is 88 Newton meter. ठीक है. Anti-clockwise moment क्या हो गया भाई? 88 Newton meter. Clockwise moment क्या हो गया? 96. Can you subtract and calculate the resultant? Yes. 96 minus 88. 8 Newton meter is your resultant moment. Simple. State and explain whether force A and C are a couple. They are not a couple because they are not equal. Force A क्या है? 60 Newton. Force C क्या है? 220 Newton. They are not equal, hence they are not a couple. The two forces are not equal, hence they are not a couple. Simple. आगे बढ़ते हैं बेटा. Now, thrusters A and C are switched off. अच्छा जी, thruster A and C को हमने switch off कर दिया. And the spacecraft is stationary. Okay. थ्रस्टर बी इज एक्टिवेटेड एट टाइम t1. अच्छा जी, थ्रस्टर बी को हमने एक्टिवेट किया एट टाइम t1, तो टाइम t1 पे आपकी वेलोसिटी जीरो होगी. परफेक्ट, बिकॉज योर स्पेसक्राफ्ट इज स्टेशनरी, प्रोड्यूसिंग अ कांस्टेंट फोर्स. ओके, सो यू हैव अ कांस्टेंट फोर्स on the aircraft until the fuel runs out at time t2. As the fuel is used, the total mass of the spacecraft decreases. अच्छा जी, जैसे जैसे आप फ्यूल यूज कर रहे हो, द टोटल मास ऑफ द स्पेसक्राफ्ट इज डिक्रीजिंग. परफेक्ट. On figure 2.2, sketch the variation of the speed of the aircraft with time from time t is equals to t1 to t2. अच्छा जी, स्पीड टाइम ग्राफ बनाना है. यू नो कि आपका ग्राफ जो है वो जीरो से स्टार्ट होगा बिकॉज द स्पेस क्राफ्ट वॉज इनिशियली स्टेशनरी. ओके बेटा, डू यू रिमेंबर दिस फॉर्मूला? एफ इज इक्वल्स टू एम ए. Yes, sir, we remember this formula. Bring acceleration to the downside. F divided by acceleration is equals to m. कैन यू एनालाइज दैट द फोर्स वॉज कॉन्स्टेंट? बेटा क्या आपको दिख रहा है कि फोर्स कांस्टेंट है? If the force is constant, you can replace this with a proportionality sign 1 over acceleration proportional to mass. इसका मतलब ये है कि mass and acceleration are inversely proportional. Beta, what does this mean? This means mass and acceleration are inversely proportional. अच्छा जी, mass and acceleration are inversely proportional. Can you realize कि mass decrease करेगा? If mass is decreasing, acceleration will increase. Now, if acceleration is increasing, हमें ये पता चल गया कि the speed will increase here. Now, sir, should I draw a line or should I draw a curve? अब यहाँ पे line बनाए या curve बनाए? Do you remember gradient of speed time graph is equals to acceleration? If your acceleration is increasing, the gradient of speed time graph will increase. If the gradient of speed time graph is increasing, you will draw an increasing curve. किस तरह का curve आ जाएगा बेटा? Somewhat like this. Simple. Let's further move ahead. अच्छा. The spacecraft now splits into a carrier and a payload as shown in figure 2.3. ठीक है, spacecraft जो है वो payload और carrier में split हो रहा है as shown in figure 2.3. Perfect. During the split, an average force of 550 Newton acts on the payload for a time of 0.3 seconds. Okay. The velocity of the payload increases by 8.5 meters per second in the upward direction. Acha ji. The combined mass of the payload and the carrier is this. Okay. State the principle of conservation of momentum. You have to state the principle of conservation of momentum. What will you say? The total momentum. Pink looks really, really ugly, but let's not change the pen now. The total momentum of a system remains constant. The total momentum of a system, the total momentum of a system remains constant. Given that no external force acts on the system, the total momentum of a system remains constant if no external force acts on the system. Simple. Show that the mass of the payload is this. बेटा हमने बताना है कि mass of the payload is 230 kg. How will we do that? How will we show that the mass of the payload is 230 kg? चलो देखते हैं. First of all, do you realize कि हमें information क्या given है? During the split, an average force of एक average force लग रही है 5500 न्यूटन्स की on the payload upward for a time of 0.3 seconds. टाइम ऑफ 0.3 सेकेंड्स के लिए ये फोर्स लग रही है. यू हैव द फोर्स, यू हैव द टाइम. डू यू रिमेंबर दिस फॉर्मूला? फोर्स इज इक्वल टू चेंज इन मोमेंटम ओवर चेंज इन टाइम. फोर्स क्या है? 5500 न्यूटन. चेंज इन मोमेंटम डिवाइडेड बाय टाइम 0.36. कैन यू कैलकुलेट द चेंज इन मोमेंटम ऑफ द पेलोड? बेटा पेलोड के लिए चेंज इन मोमेंटम निकाल सकते हो. जी सर बिल्कुल. Let's calculate the change in momentum of the payload. This comes out to be 1980 is your change in momentum of the payload. Perfect. Now you have the change in momentum of the payload. आपने क्या निकालना था? Mass of the payload. How will you do that? Change in momentum is equals to 1980. Okay. This is the change in momentum of the payload. Can you realize the payload has a change in velocity of 8.5? बेटा payload की change in velocity क्या है? 8.5. So can you write it like this? Mass of the payload into change in velocity of the payload is equals to 1980. You know the change in velocity of the payload. चेंज इन वेलोसिटी ऑफ द पेलोड क्या है? 8.5, 1980. कैन यू कैलकुलेट द मास ऑफ द पेलोड? मास ऑफ द पेलोड निकाल सकते हो 1980 डिवाइडेड बाई 8.5. This comes out to be what? This comes out to be 232.9 kg. If I round it off till two significant figures, this becomes 230 kg. ठीक है, not a big deal here. Perfect. Calculate the magnitude of the change in velocity of the carrier. बेटा आपने कैरियर की चेंज इन वेलोसिटी निकालनी है. हाउ विल यू डू दैट? बहुत 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 इजी है, बहुत इजी है. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल यू हैव टू रियलाइज, फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल आपने स्लोली ग्रेजुअली ये रियलाइज करना है दैट योर पेलोड has a change in momentum of 1980 in the upward direction. बेटा पेलोड का चेंज इन मोमेंटम है ऑफ व्हाट? द पेलोड, लेट मी मार्क इट इन ब्लैक. द पेलोड has a change in momentum of 1980 in the upward direction. है ना? The payload has a change in momentum of 1980 in the upward direction. To cancel this momentum out, payload का momentum cancel करने के लिए the carrier will have a momentum in the downward direction of 1980. बेटा अगर पेलोड का मोमेंटम 1980 है इन द अपवर्ड डायरेक्शन, कैरियर का मोमेंटम भी सेम होगा 1980 बट इन द डाउनवर्ड डायरेक्शन, सो दैट बोथ द मोमेंटम्स कैंसिल आउट. सर अब आप दोनों मोमेंटम्स को कैंसिल आउट करने का क्यों कह रहे हैं? यस, व्हाई आर यू सेइंग कि दोनों मोमेंटम्स कैंसिल आउट हो जाए? बिकॉज रियलाइज हो क्या रहा है, द इनिशियल मोमेंटम ऑफ द सिस्टम वाज जीरो. Beta, the initial momentum of the payload and the carrier was zero. The initial momentum of the payload and the carrier was zero. Hence, the final momentum of the system should also be zero. अगर आप चाहते हो कि final momentum zero हो, if you want the final momentum to be zero, the payload का momentum and carrier का momentum should be equal and acting in opposite directions. Okay, so you can say that the momentum of the carrier 1980. Perfect. Mass into change in velocity of the carrier 1980. How will you calculate the mass of the carrier? बेटा कैरियर का मास किस तरह निकालोगे? यस, नाउ दिस इज अ बिग प्रॉब्लम. कैरियर का मास किस तरह निकालोगे? हाउ विल यू कैलकुलेट दिस मिसिंग कंपोनेंट? Can you realize that the total mass, combined mass is 2.510 raised to the power of 3? The mass of the payload is 230. Beta, total mass is 2.510 raised to the power of 3 kg. और पेलोड का मास क्या है? 230 kg. If I subtract the payload ka mass from the total mass, I will get the mass of the carrier. So you can say mass of the carrier is equal to the total mass 2.510 raised to the power of 3 minus 230. What does this comes out to be? Let's calculate this. This comes out to be 2270 kg. Simple. This is the mass of the carrier. So mass of the carrier, अब substitute कर दो. Mass of the carrier is 2270 Change in velocity of the carrier 1980. Can you calculate the change in velocity of the carrier? Yes, easy peasy. 1980 2270. Can you calculate the answer? 1980 minus answer. This comes out to be 0.87 meters per second is your change in velocity of the carrier. Simple as that. कुछ भी हमने complicated यहाँ पे नहीं किया. Very easy. Nothing complicated. I hope you guys can visualize this. ठीक है. अब आगे बढ़े बेटा. Should we move ahead? चलो. Let's move ahead. आगे बढ़ते हैं. Now. No. Okay. Let's move on to this question. This one was a good question. A spring is fixed at one end and attached to the frame of a pulley at the other end. A cable passes around the wheel of the pulley. The spring is stretched. Okay, spring को हम stretch कर रहे हैं to a fixed length using the cable and the pulley. Okay, spring को हम stretch कर रहे हैं. Figure 3.1 shows the view from above of the spring, cable and pulley. अच्छा सही है. This is a top view. Okay. The spring obeys Hooke's law. Okay. And has a spring constant of 250. Okay. A force F acts on the spring. एक force F लग रही है on the spring. The tension in the cable is T. The pulley is in equilibrium. On figure 3.2, draw labeled arrows to show the direction of forces acting on the pulley. बेटा pulley पे कौन कौन सी forces लगेंगी? First of all, a force due to the spring F. Then you will have two forces due to the tension. Like this and like this. बेटा आपने one force बनानी है of F due to the spring. Two forces of tension acting towards the right. Perfect. And the pulley is in equilibrium. Equilibrium का मतलब क्या होता है बेटा? Resultant force will be equal to 0 and resultant moment will be equal to 0. Can you further tell me resultant force is equal to 0 का मतलब क्या होता है? Resultant force is equal to 0 का मतलब होता है right hand side वाली forces are equal to left hand side वाली forces and top forces are equal to the bottom forces. ठीक है? So this is what resultant force is equal to 0 का मतलब is. Okay. The force F is 1110 Newton. Determine tension T. If force F is 1110 Newton, you have to determine tension T. How will you do that? Force on the right side is equal to the force on the left side. Okay. Left side पे कितनी force है बेटा? 1110 Newton. What is the force on the right side? Tension plus tension. 2T is equals to 1110. T comes out to be 1110 divided by 2. That is 55 Newton. Simple. Let's further move ahead. Calculate the extension of the spring. अच्छा जी extension of the spring निकालनी है. Do you remember F is equals to KE? What is the force on the spring? बेटा spring पे force कितनी लग रही है? Yeah, F 1110 Newton. Perfect. 1110 हमने यहाँ पे रख दिया. What is the value of K? Spring constant क्या है? 250. Okay. Plug it here. Can you calculate the extension? 1110 divided by 250. बेटा extension किसके equal हो जाएगी? 110 divided by 250. Extension comes out to be 0.44 meters. Simple as that. Nothing complicated here. The extension comes out to be 0.44 meter. आगे बढ़ते हैं बेटा. A second identical spring with the same spring constant of 250 Newton per meter is also connected to the pulley as shown in figure 3.3. अच्छा यार एक और spring को हमने connect कर दिया as shown here. The tension in the cable is kept same. The pulley is again in equilibrium. If you are in equilibrium, the resultant force will be 0. The force on the right side will be equal to the force on the left side. Perfect. Determine the extension of the spring. Now you have to determine the extension of the spring. How will you do that? First of all, can you realize this is your tension T, this is your tension T. This will be your force F. This will be your force F. The tension in the cable is kept same. What will be your force F? Let's calculate that. Force on the right hand side is equals to force on the left hand side. बेटा राइट हैंड साइड पे क्या फोर्स है? टेंशन. टेंशन इज रिमेनिंग सेम. दिस इज 55 न्यूटन. दिस इज ऑल्सो 55 न्यूटन. 55 plus 55 is the force on the right hand side. What is the forces on the left side? F plus F. 110 divided by 2 is equals to F. F comes out to be 55 Newton. Can you calculate the extension of the springs? Yes. F is equals to K E. Force is 55. Spring constant is still 250 Newton meter. Can you calculate extension? 55 divided by 250. Extension किसके equal आ गई बेटा? Extension comes out to be 0.22 meters. Simple, easy peasy, lemon squeezy, nothing complicated here. चलो जी आगे बढ़ते हैं. Now what else is written? देखते हैं और क्या लिखा हुआ है. The elastic potential energy stored in the spring in figure 3.1 is E1. The total elastic potential energy stored in the two springs is E2. Calculate the ratio E1 over E2. अच्छा जी E1 over E2 निकालना. First of all E1 निकाल लेते हैं. What is the energy stored in one spring in figure 3.1? यहाँ पे आपके स्प्रिंग में कितनी एनर्जी स्टोर्ड है? What is the value of K? 250. बल्कि चलो हम ये वाला फॉर्मूला लगा लेते हैं. What is the value of force? 1110. What was the value of extension? 0.44. So 1 upon 2 Fe, what will be the energy stored in the first spring? 1 upon 2 into force की value क्या है भाई? What was the force being applicable on the spring? 1110. What is the extension? 0.44. Can you calculate E1? 110 divided by 2 into 0.44. 24.2 joules is your energy stored in figure 3.1. Can you calculate the energy stored in both the springs in figure 3.2? Yes. 2. 1 upon 2 into force. Beta कितनी force लग रही है? When you have two springs, how much force do you have? 55. Extension is 0.22. 55 into 0.22. Perfect. And sir, why have you multiplied 2 here? क्योंकि हमने total elastic potential energy निकालनी है. दोनों springs की elastic potential energy निकालनी है. 2 gets cancelled out. E2 comes out to be 55 into 0.22. 12.1 joules. Simple. Can you calculate the ratio E2 over E1? E2 over E1 निकाल सकते हो. E2 is 24.2, E1 is 12.1. The ratio comes out to be 2. Simple. आगे पढ़ते हैं. A laser beam emits light of a single frequency in a vacuum. The light is incident normally on a double slit and then forms a pattern of bright and dark fringes on the screen as shown in figure 4.1. This is your slit separation. ये क्या है? Slit separation है. This is your value of A. This is your value of capital D. The distance between two dark fringes is 3.3. This is your value of X, 3.3 millimeter. Okay. The separation of the slits is this, blah, blah, blah. Everything is written on the board. Okay. Explain how the pattern of bright and dark fringes is formed. बेटा bright and dark fringes किस तरह से form हो रही हैं? Any idea? What will you say? How will you structure your answer? You will say light is falling on the slits and gets diffracted. Beta light falling on the slits spreads out or diffracts. Then light superimposes or interferes at the screen to form bright and dark fringes. इसको लिख लो first of all. You will say light falling on the slit diffracts and interferes. या इस तरह लिख लो. Light falling on the screen diffracts and goes on to interfere on the screen and interfere goes on to interfere on the screen. बेटा हो क्या रहा है? लाइट जो है वो स्लिट्स पे ड्रॉप कर रही है, हिट कर रही है, इट डिफ्रैक्ट्स and interferes on the screen. What will you further say? What will you further say? When the path difference is n lambda, a bright fringe is formed. When the path difference is what? When the path difference is n lambda, a bright fringe is formed. And when the path difference and when the path difference is n plus 1 lambda over 2, a dark fringe is formed. A dark fringe is formed. यहाँ पे लास्ट लाइन क्या लिख दोगे? n is an integer, so that the examiner know that this n is an integer which can have any value 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, light falling on the slits diffracts, goes on to interfere on the screen. When the path difference is n lambda, a bright fringe is formed. And when the path difference is n plus 1 lambda over 2, a dark fringe is formed. N is an integer. Calculate the frequency of light emitted by the laser. Very easy. Do you remember the formula for Young's double slit experiment? X is equals to lambda. X is equals to lambda d over A. First of all, let's find the wavelength of the light. XA divided by D is equals to your lambda. What is your value of X? 3.3 millimeter. Okay. 3.3 10 raised to the power of minus 3. What is your value of A? What is the slit separation? 1 into 10 raised to the power of minus 3. 1 into 10 raised to the power of minus 3. What is the value of D? Beta D की value क्या है? 4.8. Can you calculate the wavelength? Wavelength निकाल सकते हो 3.3 10 raised to the power of minus 3 into 1 into 10 raised to the power of minus 3 divided by 4.8. Wavelength क्या आ जाएगी? Wavelength comes out to be 6.875. 10 raised to the power of 7 meters is equals to your wavelength. Okay, you have to calculate the frequency. कैसे निकालोगे? V is equals to f lambda. The velocity of light is what? 3 into 10 raised to the power of 8. Frequency नहीं पता. Wavelength is what? 6.875. 10 raised to the power of minus 7. Can you calculate the frequency? Yes, 3 into 10 raised to the power of 8 divided by 6.75. 10 raised to the power of minus 7. Can you calculate the frequency? Yes, 3 into 10 raised to the power of 8. 6.875 into 10 raised to the power of minus 7. The answer of frequency comes out to be 4.36 10 raised to the power of 14 hertz. This is your frequency. Simple. कुछ भी हमने यहाँ पे complicate नहीं किया. Let's further move ahead. The double slit is now removed. A second laser is placed behind the first laser. The second laser produces visible light of a different frequency. This is a red flag. You have a light of a different frequency from that of the first laser. The beam of lights from the two lasers overlap on the screen. Acha ji, the light from the two lasers are overlapping on the screen. Perfect. Explain why a steady pattern of bright and dark fringes is not formed. बेटा बहुत evident है because you have lights of different frequencies. The lights are of different frequencies, hence they are not coherent, hence there is not a steady pattern of bright and dark fringes. So you will say the lights are of different frequencies, hence they are not coherent, hence they are not coherent. सिंपल. आगे बढ़ते हैं. Figure 5.1 shows a circuit containing a battery, two fixed resistor X and Y, and a light dependent resistor LDRZ. ठीक है भाई, ये LDR है, ये दो resistors हैं. You have a battery. Simple. The battery has an electromotive force 5 volts, internal resistance 4.7 ohms. The current in X is I1 and the current in Y is I2. ठीक है, यहाँ पे I1 है, यहाँ पे I2 है. ठीक है. The resistance of X is 100 ohms. सही है, X की resistance है 100 ohms. The resistance of Z varies with intensity of light incident on it as shown in figure 5.2. ठीक है, ये LDR की रेजिस्टेंस इस तरह वेरी कर रही है एज लाइट इंटेंसिटी इज फॉलोइंग. लाइट इंटेंसिटी जितनी इंक्रीज होगी व्हाट विल हैपन. डू यू रिमेंबर फ्रॉम थ्योरी, एज लाइट इंटेंसिटी इंक्रीजेज द रेजिस्टेंस ऑफ LDR डिक्रीजेज. ठीक है, यहाँ पे लिख भी देते हैं एज लाइट इंटेंसिटी increases the resistance of LDR decreases. Perfect. Let's further move ahead. State Kirchhoff's first law. बेटा किरचॉफ का फर्स्ट लॉ क्या कहता है? व्हाट डज किरचॉफ फर्स्ट लॉ स्टेट? द सम ऑफ करंट्स अराइविंग एट अ नोड इज इक्वल टू द सम ऑफ करंट्स लीविंग द नोड. है ना? किरचॉफ का फर्स्ट लॉ क्या कहता है? सम ऑफ करंट्स अराइविंग इनटू अ जंक्शन इज इक्वल टू सम ऑफ करंट्स लीविंग अ जंक्शन. तो यहाँ पे लिख लो sum of currents arriving sum of currents arriving into a junction, arriving into a junction is same as the sum of currents leaving the junction, leaving the junction. Simple. The intensity of light on Z is this. अच्छा जी, intensity of light मिल गई. The current in the battery is this. Perfect. Show that the terminal potential difference of the battery is this. अच्छा जी, हमने terminal potential difference of the battery निकाला. Easy, not a problem. You know that the total current is what? अभी हमने देखा कि total current क्या है? 38 मिली एम्पेयर. ठीक है, the total current is 38 milli ampere. Can you calculate the voltage consumed by this internal resistor? बेटा internal resistor कितना voltage consume करेगा? Can you calculate that? Total current multiplied by the internal resistance. 38 into 10 raised to the power of minus 3. Why 10 raised to the power of minus 3? Because milliampere multiplied by the resistance, that is 4.7. Can you calculate the voltage consumed by the internal resistor? This voltage comes out to be 0.1786 volts. What is your total EMF? 5. Can you calculate the terminal potential difference? EMF minus the voltage consumed by the internal resistor. 5 minus 0.1786. निकालो जरा answer. Yes, the answer for terminal potential difference comes out to be 4.8 volts. That means ये वाली branch will also receive 4.8 volts. This branch will also receive 4.8 volts. Let's take this entire working in its place. इस सारी वर्किंग को हम अपनी प्लेस में डाल देते हैं so that we can easily find that. यहाँ पे रख देते हैं छोटा सा करके, और छोटा कर दें इसको. एक सेकेंड. हाँ जी, आई थिंक दिस विल बी. हाँ ठीक है, परफेक्ट है, दिख रहा है, सही है, गुड है. Now you have to calculate the current I2 in Y. Now you have to calculate the current in I2. So let's see क्या पूछ रहा है एग्जामिनर हमसे. We have to calculate this current in this branch I2 वाली branch. ठीक है. So first of all, can you realize the LDR is working at a light intensity of 130? अच्छा. So can you realize this is 100 ki light intensity, this is 150 ki light intensity. You are covering 50 units in how many boxes? 10 boxes. One box is equals to how many units? 5 units. So 130 will be somewhere here. At a light intensity of 130, your resistance is this. That is 120 ohm. ठीक है. So basically, the resistance of LDR is 120 ohm. Now, consider this yellow branch. Let's say this is your branch 1. इसको हम कह देते हैं branch 1. Consider branch 1. Can you calculate the total resistance of branch 1? Yes. 100 plus 120, that is 220 ohm. Can you see the total voltage in branch 1 is 4.8 volts? Can you calculate current I1? Yes, V is equals to I1. R voltage क्या है भाई 4.8. I1 निकालना है, रेजिस्टेंस क्या है 220 ओम. कैन यू कैलकुलेट I1? I1 निकाल सकते हो 4.8 डिवाइडेड बाई 220. Can you calculate I1? This comes out to be 0.0218 ampere is equals to I1. But आपने I1 नहीं निकालना था. You have to calculate the total current. How will you do that? Sorry, you have to calculate I2. You didn't want to calculate I1. तो बेटा क्या आप रियलाइज कर सकते हो टोटल करंट किसके इक्वल है 38 मिली एम्पेयर. हाउ विल यू कैलकुलेट I2? I2 is equals to 38 into 10 raised to the power of minus 3. टोटल करंट किसके इक्वल आ जाएगा 38 into 10 raised to the power of minus 3 minus 218. This comes out to be what? The total current comes out to be 0.0162 ampere. The current I2 comes out to be 0.016 ampere. So beta, how did I did this? First of all, I calculated the resistance of LDR, calculated the total resistance in branch 1. Voltage in branch 1 is 4.8. Calculated the current in branch 1. Total current 38 milliampere है. 38 milliampere से current in branch 1 को minus किया. Current I2 comes out to be 0.016 ampere. So let's take this working and place it on the downside. Oh, या इस तरह से करके इसको नीचे रख देते so that when we export this document you guys have the working in places. नीचे ले आओ yeah, like this. Perfect. ठीक है अब आगे बढ़ते हैं. You have to calculate the power dissipated in Y. You have to somehow calculate the power dissipated in Y. अगर आप रियलाइज करो Y में करंट कितना जा रहा है अभी. The current in Y is 0.016 ampere. The voltage in Y is 4.8 volts. Can you calculate the power in Y? IV. Current is 0.016. Voltage is 4.8. Can you calculate the power in Y? 0.016 into 4.8. This comes out to be 0.0768 volts as your answer. यही लिख देते हैं 0.0768 volts. Simple. Easy, nothing complicated here. आगे बढ़ते हैं. Now, the intensity of the light incident on Z decreases. State the effect on the terminal potential difference of the battery. अच्छा जी. बेटा जो लाइट की इंटेंसिटी है ऑन LDR डिक्रीजेस. सो लेट्स क्रिएट अ फ्लो चार्ट. चलो फ्लो चार्ट बनाते हैं फिर इसी फ्लो चार्ट के जरिए आंसर लिख देंगे. First of all, can you realize the light intensity on LDR is decreasing? Light intensity decreases. What will happen? The resistance of LDR increases. As the resistance of LDR increases, what will happen? The total resistance of the circuit will increase. As the total resistance of the circuit increases, the current in the circuit decreases. The total current in the circuit decreases. बेटा अगर ये टोटल करंट की वैल्यू डिक्रीज हो जाएगी 38 मिली एम्पेयर से डिक्रीज हो जाएगी द वोल्टेज कंज्यूम्ड बाय द इंटरनल रेजिस्टेंस डिक्रीजेस क्योंकि वोल्टेज कंज्यूम बाय इंटरनल रेजिस्टेंस किसके इक्वल होता है टोटल करंट into the resistance. If the total current decreases, the voltage consumed by the internal resistance decreases. What is your terminal potential difference equals to? EMF minus the voltage consumed by the internal resistance. If the voltage consumed by the internal resistance decreases, your terminal potential difference increases. So this is how you will write your answer. Let's take this flowchart to the downside and using this, we will write an answer. You will say, इसको पहले नीचे ले आते हैं. Yeah, let's make it smaller as well. Let's keep it here. Okay. So first of all, आप क्या कहोगे? You will say, let's zoom in a bit again. Okay. You will say, as the light intensity decreases, the resistance of LDR increases. This causes the total resistance to increase and the total current in the circuit decreases. Okay. टोटल रेजिस्टेंस इंक्रीज करेगी टोटल करंट क्या कर जाएगा बेटा डिक्रीज कर जाएगा ओके व्हाट विल हैपन फर्दर एज द टोटल करंट decreases what will happen further the voltage consumed by the internal resistor decreases internal resistor decreases and hence the terminal potential difference increases. Simple. Voltage consumed by the internal resistance will decrease. Terminal potential difference will increase. Simple. आगे बढ़ते हैं to the next question. State what is meant by a fundamental particle. A particle that cannot be further divided. A particle that cannot be divided. Okay. Particle Q is a meson with a charge of 0. Determine a possible quark composition for Q. हमेशा याद रखो meson में 2 quarks होते हैं and out of that one is a quark and the other is an anti-quark. ठीक है meson में 2 quarks होते हैं one is a quark one is an anti-quark. Okay. So you can say we have a up and an anti-up quark. ठीक है determine a possible composition of a determine a possible composition for quark for a particle Q. You can say up quark and anti up quark. इसकी वजह से आपका ओवरऑल चार्ज क्या हो जाएगा 0. Why? Because the charge on an up quark is plus 2 over 3e, the charge on an anti up quark is minus 2 over 3e, total charge 0. Particle Q has a mass of this, kinetic energy of this. Calculate the speed of particle Q, very easy. Kinetic energy is equals to 1 upon 2 mv square. Kinetic energy is 2.1, 10 raised to the power of minus 16 joules. हाफ इंटू मास की वैल्यू क्या हो जाएगी? 0.67. What is the value of u? U is 1.66 10 raised to the power of minus 27. 1.66 10 raised to the power of minus 27. Okay. Multiplied by velocity का square. Can you calculate the velocity? Yes. 2.1 10 raised to the power of minus 16 into 2. Okay. Divided by 0.67 into 1.66 10 raised to the power of minus 27. Can you realize velocity का square is equals to what? 3.77. 6 into 10 raised to the power of 11 is equals to your velocity का square. Can you calculate the velocity? Yes. The velocity comes out to be 6.15 10 raised to the power of 5 meters per second. This is your velocity का answer 6.15 10 raised to the power of 5 meters per second. Okay. Radium is a radioactive nuclide. State the number of electrons in a neutral atom. Always remember the number of electrons in a neutral atom are equal to the number of protons. Protons कितने हैं? 88. Electrons कितने हो जाएंगे? 88. Simple. A nucleus of radium 228 undergoes a series of decay to form nucleus X. During the process, 5 alpha particles, 4 beta particles are emitted. Determine the number of protons and number of neutrons in nucleus X. Perfect. तो बेटा फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल आपके पास एक रेडियम का न्यूक्लियस है, इससे 5 alpha particles decay कर रहे हैं. If 5 alpha particles decay, what will happen? Your mass number will decrease by what? 5 multiplied by 4. अगर एक अल्फा पार्टिकल डिके होता है तो आपका मास नंबर 4 से डिके करता है या डिक्रीज करता है. अगर 5 alpha particles निकल रहे हैं तो योर मास नंबर विल डिक्रीज बाय व्हाट? 5 into 4. By how much will your proton number decrease? If one alpha particle is emitted, your proton number decreases by 2. 5 alpha particles emit होंगे तो आपका proton number कितने से decrease होगा? 5 into 2. What does this become? ये हो जाएगा 20 माइनस कर दो 208 x and 78. अब इसके बाद there are 4 beta particles that are getting emitted. 4 beta minus particles that are getting emitted. Whenever a beta particle is emitted, the mass number remains unchanged. Proton number increases by 1. अगर 4 beta particles increase हो रहे हैं, proton number will increase by what? 4 multiplied by 1. What is your final composition of X? 208 and 82x. Simple. What are the number of protons? 82. What are the number of neutrons? 208 minus 82. ये हो जाएगा 208 minus 82. This comes out to be 126. Easy peasy. This marks the end of this paper. If you have any questions, you can ask right away in the chat.